Hey, everybody. Welcome to what I call the Great Category Breakdown. It's a roundtable discussion about speedrun categories and choosing new games. I'm Bystander Tim. My pronouns are he, him.
My name's Amber. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm C-Average. My pronouns are he, they.
Alrighty. So just to introduce myself, besides the fact that I'm going to take full advantage of this wonderful photo that GDQ took of me, I'm Bystander Tim. I've run a lot of different speed games. Probably the easiest thing I could say is that the fact that there's a wide variety of stuff on this is because the game came out and I'm like, wow, this game is great. I'm going to speedrun it. And then I do like 2 weeks of runs and move on to something else. But obviously some big ones on here is Office Race I just ran at AGDQ 2023. I just ran an indie game called Bloody Hell this morning at like 5:30. And
12 hours ago.
Yeah, we're all talking about time here. And then I've also run Destiny 2 for SGDQ, so I've had the opportunity to do a couple different GDQ runs. And
Hi, I'm Amber. As you can see from the fact that 3 of the games that on my list of games I've speedrun are the same game, I play a lot of Mario Kart, believe it or not, and I also played Garfield Kart once. Other than that, I mean, I've played a couple other indies, Hades and Hollow Knight being the 2 big ones, but I mostly play Mario Kart, and when I branch out, it's not usually for a very long time, and I'm excited to talk about that.
And I'm C. I mostly play indie platformers, various other indie games, but as you can see from my list, I kind of do all the things. Kind of like Tim, a new game comes out, I like it, I will speedrun it for a little bit. Not listed here are all the games that I will learn the run for and then never actually do runs for, because that's just who I am.
it's like the main problem afflicting every speedrunner. Alrighty, so just to get some obvious things, if you're completely new to speedrunning, obviously speedrun categories help define your goal. So probably the most basic categories, which when you put it in the live split, if your game doesn't already have established categories, it'll give you like any percent, which is completing the game as fast as possible using any means. 100%, which is collecting whatever the community defines as 100%. And low percent, which is completing the game with the least amount of collectibles or progression you can do. And categories help define speedrun objectives. Obviously, as speedrunning evolved, everybody moved on from just trying to beat the game to you start to see some more miscellaneous categories that avoid beating the entire game. Some of the examples I've included here are like, for Grand Theft Auto 5, there's a category called Trevor percent, which is supposed to be unlocking Trevor, but the run takes place from starting a new game to beating the first heist, which is about an hour. There's also Heart percent. Obviously, before all like the reverse bit magic and everything that happened with Skyward Sword, where it became an hour-and-a-half long speed game, Heart was a really good way of turning what is normally a 5-hour run into a digestible 2-hour run. And then there's also things like Master Sword for Breath of the Wild, which the entire goal of that is to get enough hearts in order to grab the Master Sword and you're done. So obviously with this in mind, some of the things that are really easy to think about when it comes to picking a category you want to run is like, what categories are the most accessible? Do you need amount of preparation? Like for New Game Plus files, a lot of time, some communities will have a file ready, some won't. What's the most fun? What's the most competitive? And why do you choose the run in that category? So
Yeah.
I'll let Amber take the lead here.
Sure. So when you are starting out, this slide has a couple of different questions you can ask yourself when you're trying to figure out what speedrun category you want to start with when you choose a game. If you're just starting in speedrunning, it's often recommended that you choose a game that you like or something that you know that you can do in a game already and trying to do it as fast as you possibly can, or looking up a route for a game that you like. Obviously, if you type in YouTube, like a name of a game, like speedrun is usually in the recommended for like after you autocomplete the name of a game, right? And then once you've learned a couple games or you've learned one run and you want to start branching out, you can start to ask yourself what you want to accomplish, either for yourself in terms of like a personal philosophy of like, do you want to push yourself as fast as possible? Do you want to show mastery over a game, its physics engine, its mechanics, or just like, do you want to accomplish something else that the game has to offer, right? Like, if you were running one of those segmented categories that you had mentioned earlier, like Trevor percent, like maybe that's the only run that you did for Grand Theft Auto, and now you want to try branching out to completing the entire game, which is a much more daunting task because it's a much longer run, right?
Yeah, the immediate thought I had in my head is like, hey, what do you want to accomplish? Half the games that I take interest in speedrunning, I'll look at the leaderboard and it's like, oh, that's 10 and a half hours, 20%.
Sure.
So I apparently want to accomplish making myself feel really bad about speedrunning.
No, and then you also get to like just setting goal times can be another thing, right? Like once you've hit a goal, then you might want to find a new category as well, right?
Yeah,
like looking at speedrun.com, you see the whole list of times. And so you might pick like, okay, well, right around like 15th place, that's an hour 40, and the record's an hour 20 in this thing. But
Yeah.
140 seems like a pretty good goal for me to try to get to. So when you're choosing a new category, it might be good to like also have a goal time when you're choosing it, right?
Definitely.
Which kind of brings into the third question here, which does the run respect your time, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that any run that you're doing is like an amount of time that you're going to dedicate to it is like reasonable for you, right? Like we all have personal lives that we have to do, like
Yeah.
we have to live our lives.
In the
as
end,
well.
this is a hobby.
Exactly. A couple good questions that you have to ask yourself are just, is it fun for you, right? Is the game fun to practice? Is the category fun to practice? Is the run fun to grind? And is the run fun to watch too if you prioritize streaming, right?
Yeah.
I know that you added that to the point, but before you talk, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have a personal quick story, which is me like starting to speedrun.
Yeah.
So when I first got into speedrunning, one of the games that I wanted to run was Super Mario Galaxy, which
Right.
you may remember is not on my list. But I started learning the category, and or the any percent run, right, which is a very long run. It's like it was over 3 hours at the
Yeah,
time, and I think
definitely.
it still is like just right around there. And I got through like the second hub world just on the offline practice. But I also really wanted to stream, and I hadn't started streaming yet. And so I picked another game that I thought would be fun to run and fun to stream because it kind of is a little bit easier to get into. It's fun to grind runs of it, and it doesn't require quite as much practice. So I picked Mario Kart.
Yeah.
And then I never learned Galaxy. And I just kept playing Mario Kart because it was so fun
Yeah.
to just play. And that's like a really important question to ask yourself is it fun to play, right? And you can surprise yourself in the middle of finding a different answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to build off of the is it fun to watch, as an Ori and the Blind Forest runner, if you ever look at that leaderboard, you'll notice that the most popular category is not any percent like it is in most games. It's actually a longer category called all skills, no out of bounds, no teleport anywhere. And a big reason for that is that the Ori community loves running like tournaments and stuff of that nature. And any percent is garbage to watch. Most of the run is done behind a menu, so you just can't see anything. So nobody really wanted to grind it. It's not fun to stream. It's not fun to host a tournament for. So all skills blossomed.
For sure.
Alrighty, thank you. So obviously we have some ideas here for choosing a new game or category. The first one, when your main category doesn't appeal to you anymore, the example I always think about is, I'm personally a big fan of Zem, who used to be a Ratchet and Clank speedrunner, and a lot of the times, like at least the outward things I've heard about the Ratchet and Clank community have always been like, oh, I'm gonna go really, really hard on New Game Plus, and then they'll get burnt out and be like, I wanna run 100%. I wanna run this other thing, because you sort of box yourself in this one little like either set of movement tech that might not be healthy to perform, or just you're not seeing as much as you want of the game. So I think that's a really good start. I also think we've talked about it before, you and I, see, of our mutual love of games like Marvel Spider-Man, where we would love to run that game if you didn't hit go and have a 4-minute category or a 4-minute cutscene right at the beginning of the game. And if the community adopted, like, let's say, a modded file that started right at go, and split that off, we probably would both be running that game right now.
Right. I mean, and you see that with games like Kingdom Hearts 2, right? And the no gummy ship mod once the PC port, existed. And another example of like this sort of thing is randomizers, right? Not quite the same thing as a speedrun category, but it's one of those things where you can keep working on your skills, but not do the exact same grind that you've been doing over and over again. And I think that's why, randomizers are so prevalent in the speedrun community.
Yeah.
Sure. And they often have a save file that you start with that already has like the opening cutscene completed for something like, I know that Super Mario Sunshine as well, like they don't necessarily, you don't have to watch the opening cutscene for that, and if you're doing a Sunshine rando, you start after that 10 minutes of cutscene with like 5 seconds of gameplay or whatever it was.
Yeah. You'll notice that thing we mentioned about runs respecting your time is that a lot of us have found speedruns where it's like, oh, cool, I get to move for a minute, and then I have to watch 8 minutes of cutscenes all in a row. So it's definitely a thing to consider. There's also things like when your main speed game doesn't appeal to you anymore. Obviously, Amber, you've talked a lot about like how you really, really like Mario Kart and you've really invested a lot of time into it. And then you have those moments where it's like, if I put Roy near a cart anymore, I'm gonna lose it.
Yeah, sometimes I always come back to Mario Kart after a little while because it is just the game that has resonated the most with me and is the most fun for me to push myself. But I absolutely get burnt out, right? You can't play the same game over and over constantly for months on end unless you start to really see results. And sometimes you hit a wall, sometimes you hit a lull where you're not feeling quite as motivated. And then it is important to branch out, even if it's just for a short amount of time, right? Like, I wouldn't necessarily say that Mario Kart wasn't appealing to me anymore. It's more that just I was burnt out, and burning out doesn't necessarily mean that. But when that happens, a lot of the time I'll look for something that's extremely different to Mario Kart, right? Like something more in line with like just how I play games casually. Like picking up Hades after it came out in early access, right? I was also feeling a little burnt out with Mario Kart at the time, and Hades came out, and I started playing it in early access and started running it in early access. And eventually, I stopped running Hades, and I went back to Mario Kart, and the same thing happened when I tried out Hollow Knight. The same thing happened when I tried out Hyrule Warriors, the first one, not the one on Switch, on the Wii U, rest in peace.
Poor Wii U.
Yeah. Another thing, doesn't apply to me specifically, but I think that both of you have talked about it, is leaderboard rules changes and adding new categories. I guess maybe not adding a new category for Ori, but something like that, right? Where a category becoming popular might lead you to want to try it out yourself, which leads you to change categories and maybe put the one that you're currently working on hold.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely think, like, when it comes to changing a category, probably the silliest example I have is I mentioned that game called Office Race that I ran for AGDQ 23. There used to be 2 categories. There was any percent and any percent all races. The reason that it was there was that when we started running that game and the community, with ones of people developed, we were uncertain how to activate the boss fight in order to beat the final boss at the end. And everybody didn't. Everybody tried their best, and it was like, what if we just ended the run when you finished the last race? Because we're not entirely sure the boss is playable. So, and then nobody submitted a run because we figured it out like 2 weeks later.
There you go.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just want to try something new.
Yeah, and to kind of build on like the leaderboard rules and such, some communities will like to do things that are like glitchless or whatever, but as we probably all have been in conversations about, it's really hard to define what a glitch is, right? So like you can kind of build categories that make sense for the community, right? Like find a set of rules that the community likes and like is a fun run, right? It comes all the way back to like, is the run fun? And that's, again, going back to Ori, our selected restrictions category is exactly that. 1,000 messages of trying to decide what is and isn't a glitch, we finally just decided, you know what? It doesn't matter. These are the set of restrictions that we want on this run. We just call it selected restrictions.
Yeah.
Problem
any
solved.
percent restricted is like so much. It's like there's any percent no major glitches, and then you get to like have a whole conversation about what defines a glitch, or you can just say there's any percent restricted and lay out the specific things that make the run less fun.
Yeah, I definitely think about stuff like Link to the Past, where it's like any percent no exploration glitch, because with exploration glitch, it's like 3 minutes.
Sure.
But with any percent no major glitches, it's still like an hour long because you still have a majority of the objectives that you
Yeah.
need to complete.
And a lot of those NMG runs are just restricted and have like a specific list of like what defines a major glitch and what
Yeah.
defines a minor glitch. That's all up to communities to decide.
Yeah. So we've thought about like some options to consider here. So first thing would be like same game, new format and category. The immediate thing I always think about is like Joey and I had a different extended conversation about this, but talking about like Marvel Spider-Man 100%, which even as that run developed, it was still like, oh, any percent was like okay, but I really, really liked that one time when I played it casually and didn't think about what it would take to consistently run 100%. So you definitely have to think about like how you're approaching the game and whether or not even a game you like running is any percent. Like the game I just ran for GDQ, I don't think I would touch in a non-any percent category because I really, really like the pace of it. Sure. And meanwhile, 100% has a lot of extra deviation that doesn't necessarily keep up that same spirit of the any percent run. So I just choose to run any percent.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ratchet and Clank as well, like
Yeah.
Ratchet and Clank runners focusing on New Game Plus for the longest time and then wanting to branch over to 100%, still staying in the same game,
Yeah.
right? Or like there are a lot of Ratchet and Clank games, but as far as like the PlayStation 2 era of them, like someone might want to move from Ratchet 1 to Ratchet 2 or Ratchet 3 to Ratchet 1 or whatever, right?
Which kind of leads us right into our next like thing to consider is like sequels or earlier titles.
Exactly,
Titles in the
exactly.
franchise, right? Like just because you really like one game doesn't necessarily mean you'll enjoy the speed run of the next one, right? That's I'm gonna keep saying Ori. I'm sorry, everyone. It's just gonna keep happening.
Those
but
games are similar.
yeah, the games are similar, but like one of them is a much better speed run, and the other one's a much better casual game, and like that's okay, right? Like, so you know,
Yeah, and some sequels are in the same format, in the same genre,
Yeah.
like Mario Kart, but every Mario Kart game is completely different as far as how they drive and how you control things and how the physics of everything works. And so for me personally, I don't feel super motivated to go back to like a Mario Kart Wii or a Double Dash, but there are some runners who do want to go from Double Dash to Wii and maybe touch 8 or 8 Deluxe after a little while as well. It really depends on the game, on the genre, on the franchise.
Yeah, and I think another good one, and I'm gonna shout out people in the crowd here, but I like sort of the way I grew up in speedrunning was in the Borderlands community.
Sure.
And a lot of the times, Borderlands games will all keep the same spirit of like the runner toolkit that you're gonna need, which at some point there's a way to get some version of infinite ammo, there's a way to grenade jump or a way to boost yourself forward. And it becomes very, very easy when you start spending a lot of time, like in Borderlands 2. And Borderlands, the pre-sequel, is the exact same engine with like a little bit of differences, but you find that movement carries a lot into there.
Yeah.
And it definitely is very easy to be like, oh, I can already thrive in a different game or even a different run just because I've already mastered this from the amount of time that I spent running any percent now that I'm moving on to 100% or all quests.
Totally. You know, actually, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You had mentioned Destiny 2, and I know that you had ran that with a group of people running one of the raids for GDQ in the past.
Yeah.
Do you ever go back to a prior? I don't play the game, so I don't know if you even can go back to prior raids and stuff like that. But does that sort of translate as well, where it's like the Destiny has like this sort of toolkit, and so a group can do a run of one raid and then maybe branch off to a different thing once one becomes a little bit less fun?
Yeah. Probably the most immediate thing for Destiny is the movement tech.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, for example, using that Deep Stone Crypt run that we did in 2021, that raid we ran as a class setup of 4 Titans and 2 Warlocks. The Warlocks have the same movement tech that the Warlocks had the same movement tech that they did then now, which is a lot of, there's this move called Icarus Dash, which propels you forward, as well as, actually, we did that run before Eager Edge came out, which completely revolutionized how movement in that game works. Essentially, you pull out a sword and you lunge forward super quickly, and there's ways to chain momentum. But if we went back to that right now, we would do that completely differently.
But you could, is the
Yeah.
thing, right? Like, you might want to try something new after a while if a run is getting stale.
Yeah, and we could even revisit that same run and have it feel completely different just because we've all taken a break from it as well.
Absolutely.
So the other thing would be like new games, same type of category. Obviously, Joey, as you've gone on and on about Ori and the Blind Forest, has there ever been like a nicher category that you've wanted to tackle in Ori?
Yes, and it was a bad decision, but I am
You
the
learn a lot.
yeah. So we talked about the selected restrictions category earlier, and I really enjoyed like any percent selected restrictions. But then there are a ton of other Ori categories, including all cells, which has an out of bounds and no out of bounds variant. I eventually decided, what if I did all cells, but with selected restriction rule set?
No.
Don't do it. It's bad. Turns out glitches are fun. But yeah, and then like new game, new category, that would be like the Ori 2 sort of thing, right? So we had all skills was the really popular run in Ori, which is going to all the skill trees, getting all the skills, beating the game. That didn't exactly exist in in the same way in Ori 2. So we couldn't just jump from all skills to all skills, right? So, you know, if you're going to pick up a new game, you sometimes have to expect, like, if you don't run just like a pure any percent category, you might have to pick up a new category.
Right. For Mario Kart, kind of going back to the same game, new format, just
Yeah.
like right away. I'm going to talk for a little bit here. The same game, new format. For Mario Kart, that means like going from focusing on a specific set of cups to like a different set of cups to
Yeah.
another different set of cups, or playing all of them. For another example on this list, that polar opposite, talking about my own experiences, sometimes when I don't want to play Mario Kart, I try to go towards the polar opposite of what Mario Kart is.
Yeah.
And so Mario Kart without items, which is the main subset of rules subset that I run, doesn't have a lot of RNG. If I want to have the game dictate what I'm doing a little bit more and like give in to RNG, I might run something like, I don't know, Mario Party, one of the most random runs in existence.
Yeah.
Where you have very little control, but still some, and it's all about like trying to, you find a balance, right? Like sometimes I want to just be pushing my skill as much as possible, and sometimes I want to just have a little bit of fun with it, and so picking something that's completely different. Or instead of something like a racing game, moving towards, I don't know, a 2D platformer like Hollow Knight, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even staying within like the realm of 2D platformers, it would be something going from like a Rayman game to Hollow Knight.
Right.
Just
yeah.
because.
because they have different structures too,
Yeah.
right? Like one's a Metroidvania and one's like level based.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then like the very last thing on this list is a community choice 12-hour challenges thing. If you don't know what game to branch off to, there are often just opportunities to do it with a group of other people. I know like Golden has his 12-hour challenges that happen, is it twice a year? I'm not on Twitter anymore.
Yeah,
Twice a
I was
year.
gonna say I think he still kept up with it. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure there was a 2022 one. I don't think there's been one in
Okay,
2023
so once
yet.
a year, but here's 12 hours, learn a new speed game. It's usually a themed thing, so that can kind of help dictate your choice.
Yeah, definitely.
And community choice, what I mean by that is sometimes like a group of people in a community will all run a new game kind of at the same time, right? There was
Yeah.
a subset of Mario Kart 8 runners that went off and learned Galaxy all at the same time.
Oh wow,
Just completely different, and I didn't for some reason.
staying on brand.
Apparently. There was a group of back when Splatoon 1 came out, there was a group of speedrunners who played Splatoon but didn't run Splatoon.
Yeah.
And the group of them all did a Splatoon run, not really knowing how the route works and all of that. And there's like one major skip that took some people like 2 tries and some people like 20 tries, and so everything just kind of fell apart. But like that might be kind of fun if you run a completely different kind of game than Splatoon, but
Yeah.
you like playing the game casually, like getting a group of speedrunners who play the game casually to try the run out just for once. Like it can be kind of fun, and I think some people actually ended up sticking with the run
Yeah.
after the fact too.
Yeah, and like you could even bring that down smaller, right? Instead of a community, it might just be like
You and a
your
friend.
your buddy. Like I DM Tim all the time, like, "Yo, hear me out. Let's run this game." And Tim goes, "Yo, you're an idiot. We're not running this game.
And
But
then making him run the game.
Right.
Anyways.
Okay.
Eventually.
You had me at crab champions, first of all. But in all reality, the obvious example for community choice would be for the people at the event. We have the wonderful Frame Fatales table over there, and Frame Fatales has, is it a month?
I literally forgot. We talked about me talking about this, and I completely blanked about it. Yes, Frame Fatales every month or every 2 months or so, the community like picks a game to learn as like a group, like a game of the month speedrun thing. I don't actually do it myself, but I know that it's a thing in the Discord.
But it definitely, the games that they've considered for that, like, hit all of the markers, especially for, like, not only is it, like, the most approachable category, it's also, like, a very accessible game.
Yeah, and some people have actually, like, ran on GDQ as a result of that as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's definitely been a really, really fruitful thing. So, obviously, one of the biggest things, and we're all here because we're all involved, is just finding a group that really resonates with either a game or a series of games, and you can really find success in speedrunning. So I think with that now, we're going to open this up to question and answers. So obviously, if you have any questions of your own, feel free to come on up, but we have some examples here. So like, have you ever considered either starting speedrunning or changing it up and running a new game? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you wanting to compete at the highest level, or do you want to go into uncharted territory and help route a new category?
I can answer that one myself. I do not want to route anything new because that is so much work.
Yeah.
It is so much effort and testing trying to find the right thing. And there are some people who absolutely love that and love trying to find those new categories. I'm looking at both of you with this one.
I mean, and every game needs a good glitch hunter, right?
Exactly.
Like,
And I am not that person
Yeah.
at all. But if you give me a route, I will try to push that route to its potential for sure. And like sometimes trying to find something new with it or find a consistent way to do something that looks inconsistent. But that's usually like as far as I want to push it.
Yeah.
And it really depends. Like some people want to
Completely immerse themselves in like a new game.
Yeah, exactly. Some people want to push a completely new game and find the route for it. And some people want to not have somebody do the work for them, but just like they want to focus all their energy on the route instead of on the creation of the route, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a different niche.
Yeah. I mean, the one example I always have of like starting in uncharted territory is the amount of games that I found from scrolling on like newly released on Steam, where it's like, oh, not only am I the first person speedrunning this, I might be like one of the first people playing it.
Yeah, you have a brain. You have a brain.
Yeah. But it's also definitely a lot
Did you mean awful block?
all the Google search results are coming at me. And then the other thing, obviously, to consider, we've talked about communities before, but a lot of the times if you're either wanting to learn or you're even wanting to start a new category or route something original would be, are there any community resources that can help you get started? Obviously, Amber, you're a part of the Mario Kart community, and it feels like there are 10 to 20 people every day running every IL in the game, trying to find new strats.
Yeah, the speedrun.com page has a lot of different guides about tech and stuff, and then the Discord server. There's usually a Discord server for almost every popular speed game.
Yeah, which is definitely a thing to consider, whether it's through speedrun.com or whether it's just looking it up, is that 9 times out of 10, unless it is the case of like what I just explained, where I'm the only person playing it ever, there is more than likely a group of people who are as passionate about the game you want to run as everybody else. And I mean, obviously, see, you're in a big community like the Ori community, even as you're not as active in running. Obviously, there's a bunch of people who are just willing to talk about Ori all the time.
All the time.
And even if you trek on that journey about coming up with a new category or trying a new run, like, there are people who can help you along the way where it's like, hey, can we even accomplish this glitch in order to do it at all? Mm-hmm. So if anybody in the crowd actually has any questions, like, let's go ahead and bring them up. We want to hear from you, or we could even post some questions back. We have a mic up here if you want to. We have a mic up here if you want to go ahead and talk.
Hey, do you want to talk at all about running meme formats?
Running game formats?
Meme formats.
Meme formats.
Oh,
yeah. Meme
like
categories. Yeah. Oh, boy.
That's a really good point. We hadn't even...
Yeah, it's I think that kind of falls into what I was saying about like randomizer and stuff. When you're like kind of burning out on a game or something, sometimes doing just something dumb.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
Yeah.
with Bastion, at one point, I just had this idea. I'm like, what if I immediately open the debug menu and give myself the pike so I could do hopscotch percent? Because instead of rolling, you like hop if you have the pike instead of the hammer. And it's like, that never going to do anything with that run, but I just wanted to try it, see how fun it was.
For sure. There's a couple there's one very well known meme category in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, blue yourself, which is just hitting yourself with a blue shell as quickly as possible. I think the record is seconds. I actually helped to name that category.
Really?
I've never run it. I've never ran it, but I helped to name the category
Oh, you've
because
left your mark.
well, people wanted to call it BS percent for blue shell percent, and I personally am not a huge fan of like word percent. I
Yeah.
think any percent, low percent, 100 are good, but like especially when it's like just like a word and then percent, it often doesn't really give a good definition of the thing. But then blue yourself kind of explains it. Hitting yourself with a blue shell, people in the community call them blues, anyways. So
Yeah.
that's a very popular meme category. Another popular meme category that I have threatened to make a real thing a couple of times, but is not actually on the leaderboards, is all cannons, which is just not even completing every track that has a cannon, but just going into the track that has the cannon, going on the cannon, landing, and then exiting the track, going to the next course that has a cannon. Not even finishing each run, but just you can make fun rules for yourself just
Yeah.
as a way to branch out and like give yourself a little bit of levity if you're getting tired of a grind.
I definitely feel that, especially in Mario Kart 8 with all the DLC coming out, where
Oh my
it's
God,
gonna
there are so many more cannons now.
it's definitely gonna be like, oh boy, we've invalidated the all cannons run because like
Yeah.
DK
Like-
Summit came back again.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I think a lot of the best meme categories also just like happen by accident. It'll just be like people hanging out at an event like this as a group, and then like Spider-Man, for example, the silly 5 high fives category. So we were just like chilling one day practicing for a run, and we're like, wait, can we force the random high fives that the pedestrians will give you? And it's like, all right, who can get 5 high fives the fastest? And
Yeah.
it's like,
And
and
I-
people
and I
played
mean-
it all the time.
Yeah, and I definitely think community is a big thing about that. Obviously, I feel like there would be somebody upset at me somewhere if I didn't talk about things like 5 golden pigs from Paper Mario, which all that literally is having a file with like 999 coins, and there's a slot machine right by the train station in South Toad Town that spawns these they're called little oinks. And the goal is to get 5 golden ones, and people have gone mad grinding that at some point.
I think I can just say 5 hot dogs percent for Kirby Air Ride and then just like,
Yeah.
step away from the conversation.
Yeah,
again.
Or
we definitely have to have some 5 hot dogs rep. That's for sure.
Pringles. Pringles happens every event, and I mean I don't really know
that
much about
game
the
is a meme.
game,
It's
but
not
yeah,
just a
like
category.
it's just
Yeah.
a whole meme game, right? Like, and it's a big community thing, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and of course the other thing is I mentioned the Borderlands community earlier. I also have to talk about whole percent. So
I'm sorry.
So, if you've played Borderlands 2, at one point the map of Sanctuary becomes Sanctuary Whole, and I'm seeing people in the crowd like shake their heads like, yeah, whole percent, yeah. But using the movement tech of Geared Salvador, who is the fastest moving character, the goal is to try and like hole-in-one yourself into the big Sanctuary Hole and transition to the new area, and it is definitely the kind of category where people already have like health issues running Geared Salvador just because of some of the things you need to do with your wrist. And then they found those health issues running whole percent.
Turning a meme category into a serious thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned just making the community upset. I wouldn't want to be the one where it's like, hey, Doc, I ran this meme category and broke my wrist.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, I say threaten to make it a category as a complete joke.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think we're waiting for the last couple DLC tracks to come out before we actually make all cannons a real thing.
Already. Was there anybody else who wanted to say something?
Yeah.
Come on up.
Apologize, I have to preface my question with a little context.
Sure.
Are any of y'all familiar with the Super Mario Bros. 3 sound thing that Mitch Flower Power has been working on. There's like there's some manipulation you can do with RNG that's related to sound cues, that if you start everything up.
Interesting.
And even if you're not familiar, the question
the
applies
concept.
Yeah.
is there are categories, all four, it's 100%, that are affected by these things that is very technical and very challenging to implement and is what you might say could be unfun. And yet, if you want to go fast, it's the fastest way to go, right? If you want to, so I guess I'm curious about your disposition towards splitting off new categories, creating new categories when new tech is discovered, at the risk of invalidating the work of runs. Because the moment you allow a run in, for example, that
Yeah.
uses new tech, then all of a sudden every other run has to do that, or they won't be in contention. So I guess if you have any thoughts, anything, if you've had to think about it for your own communities, how readily you will sort of say this isn't allowed, even though it's not explicitly stated, versus creating a new category for it. Because
Yeah.
I imagine that's really challenging.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, the immediate one would be anything that really derives a category split. Most of the time will come from a massive, massive time difference. So I think about stuff like, actually, Skyward Sword is probably a really, really good example where, like, something like reverse bit magic, where all of a sudden, instead of beating every single temple in the game because you have to, it turns into, oh, I can fly from Skyloft right at the beginning of the game, and all of a sudden I'm halfway through the game from one single glitch. Obviously, that's going to allow a category split. At the same time, it'll be stuff like Paper Mario, where it's like any percent Peach Warp and any percent no Peach Warp, where it's just that. It's that idea of like, if the run is keeping the same spirit of what it is, but there is this faster tech that does take a good amount of mastery to understand, there will be some moments where it's like, people could choose to still run it without it. It's just going to be there, but it is not something that completely changes the run, but it is another skill in order to become better at the run that if you're going to play at the highest level, you're going to want to implement.
Sure. I think that it comes down to the specific community.
Yeah.
I think that a question like that, where it's like a specific bit of technique that is not necessarily fun to implement, is very, very like high skill and doesn't lead to an enormous amount of time save, but like an amount of time save that is significant enough to like invalidate other people's runs if they don't use it.
Yeah.
Is one of those things that is like polarizing, that can be polarizing enough to just warrant a community discussion about it, right?
For sure.
It's not necessarily up to one person, one moderator, or even the mod team. It can often be up to the entire community to come to a vote to decide it.
Yeah.
Right? One example that I can speak on very briefly is in Mario Party. There are some games that you can only do an all boards run, with each board being 15 turns. And then some of the Mario Party games on the GameCube, you can do a 10-turn game instead of 15 turns.
Yeah.
For the longest time, people were just always doing 15 turns, even though you could do 10. And then some people just started doing 10, which made it a lot more random if you would actually be able to complete the board.
Yeah.
But it was faster, and it was on the same leaderboard, and the times were very significant.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that community decided 10 turns is the norm for that game now.
Yeah.
And if you want to do 15 turns, you can. It gives you a better chance of winning, but it's going to be slower, and it's going to be on the same category, or it's going to be on the same leaderboard. Another thing that you could do for that specific situation, Speedrun.com's leaderboards allow you to add a modifier that you can just like say, did you use this glitch, yes or no? And then you can filter runs by if they use that glitch or not. You can set it so that all runs prior to this being implemented are no, and then any new submissions have to answer yes or no. And it's all on the same leaderboard. It's just that in addition to saying like what day the run is, here's the VOD, what patch it is or whatever, like it'll also just like have a ticker of like, does it use the sound cue glitch? And then like you can filter runs that do use the sound cue glitch or that don't, right?
Yeah.
But it's really a community-to-community discussion, and it's not necessarily one person's decision to make or even just the mod team. I think it really can come down to the community. It's very, very context dependent, depends on the situation, depends on the game.
For sure.
Right. Because like even the size of the community can make a difference in
Totally.
that, right?
Yeah.
Like a game as big as like SMB3, making another leaderboard is free, right? There are
Yeah.
so many runners. It's not like you're gonna have a new leaderboard that has 2 runners on it, right? But if you have running a game like Tim, like dividing the board might not make sense because now you've just got 2 boards with 1 run each on them. And
Right.
Is that really, worth it? And at the same time, it's free to make another board, right? So it really just kind of depends on the situation, on the community, and like Amber said, it's a community discussion at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah,
Come on up.
I think we can probably do 2 more, 1 or 2.
Yeah. We've got a decent amount of time, but if only a few more people have questions, we can have them and
Yeah.
we'll take off.
Sure. So, given the choice between a highly competitive and optimized leaderboard versus a more casual one where there's new tricks being learned every day, what do you prefer now as experienced runners, and what would you suggest for a new speedrunner?
Ooh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I think for a new speedrunner, an established game probably makes the most sense because as long as the established game has tutorials, right? If it's a game that has been around for a while, has a lot of runners, you probably can find a tutorial. You also will have a lot of different skill levels of runs to look at, right? You don't have to compare yourself to the world record holder. You can look at some of those slower times and see, some of the strats that are being used at, a more entry level. But me personally, at this point, I kind of enjoy just, like I said way back at the beginning of this, I like learning runs and then never actually doing them. So for me, a new game is like very good at it for that, right? I can learn a run alongside the community and just be like, okay, cool. Like, you all have fun with that now. I'm good.
Yeah, I think I agree with that pretty much entirely. I think that for a new runner, having resources is a really important thing because when you don't really know what goes into speedruns and what goes into like learning a new run, having resources and something to follow is really important. And then
Yeah.
once you've started to develop your fundamentals for a game, you can start to branch off into things that are like other games that have the same sort of structure, that use the same sort of fundamentals for a run.
Yeah.
I think with new people to speedrunning will want to have resources so that they know, so that they have an idea of something to follow, right? And if once you've started to learn runs and get more experience with the act of speedrunning, then it really becomes a personal question.
Yeah.
Right? Like the 2 of you definitely like learning new runs and
Yeah.
like pushing new runs as they are being made, right?
Yeah.
Helping to route things even. I don't. I very much want to come into a new game and see a route and see a list of techniques and learn from that, right? That is entirely personal preference.
Yeah.
A similar thing, Mario Kart 8 is not a game with really any glitches.
Yeah.
Like there are some Mario Karts that have a lot of glitches. There are a lot of speed games that have a lot of glitches.
Right.
I have very, 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 very little experience using glitches to my advantage when speedrunning.
Right.
And so if I were to learn a new game, I am almost always going to pick a no major glitches category because I just don't have the experience with doing glitches in any games, really. And every game is going to be different with how they work, but they all still have some amount of fundamentals, right? So whatever games you start to learn can often inform how you feel about learning games in the future.
Yeah. And I mean, using the example of a highly optimized leaderboard as well, that can also just be like a highly volatile leaderboard. Like using the information that both of you gave, it's like if you were fresh out to speedrunning, but you really, really liked The Legend of Zelda and had a Nintendo Switch, I would highly recommend running Breath of the Wild before I would jump into the conversation about Tears of the Kingdom right now, because that run for 6 months to a year is going to have 30 to 40 people like glitch hunting it every single day and finding new optimizations that you want to implement, while Breath of the Wild has a very, very solid ground of
Yeah.
resources and a very, very good idea of what each category is, how it's defined, and how any technique that you're going to be using will change or enhance your run.
Totally.
Yeah, and I mean, this kind of comes back to our second question here is like, of what kind of speedrunner are you, right? Are you a glitch hunter? If you're a glitch hunter, new games are going to be your jam a lot of times, or just like games that don't have large established communities.
Right.
But if you're somebody that is like super interested in pushing games to the highest level, pushing for the tops of leaderboards, stuff like that, pushing to the top of a 3-person leaderboard is definitely not the same sort of competitive spirit as pushing to the top of a Mario leaderboard, right?
Yeah.
I think that's like, Amber's a much higher skilled, like higher level speedrunner than I am, right? I'm a
For
very
one game.
sure,
right?
but right.
Yeah.
But you are at the tops of leaderboards, right? Whereas I'm a very like mid. I'm gonna go wide. I'm gonna learn a lot of things, and I'm gonna learn them. I'm gonna do them a little bit, and then I'm done with them, and I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I like to bounce to new games, right? I like to learn the new thing, keeps going wide, whereas Amber can kind of drill in on a game and get really good at it.
Yeah, and when I branch out, it's not going to be for an extended period of time. It's more just as a breather.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you're here. I would highly suggest just talking to people about this as well, because you're going to find a lot of people from a lot of different speedrun communities and a lot of different walks of life when it comes to video games. And there's definitely a lot of different stories here. That's one thing I really, really love, and I highly suggest anybody who this is their first GDQ or it's their first couple of GDQs, is just like reach out to other people. There's going to be a ton of incredible people here who all have this different approach to speedrunning, that the three of us have a bunch of different stories that we all really, really love to talk about. All right. Do we have anybody else?
Oh boy.
Oh, boy.
Just a fun one to end on.
Sure.
What's y'all's each individual favorite odd category? It doesn't have to be like a meme or a silly category, but just like something way out there.
I'll go ahead and start off this. I really, really, really love talking about the Outer Worlds any percent, because that game within 2 weeks was like 12 to 13 minutes long. And the entire idea of that category was like, it's made by the people, or that entire idea of that game is, it was made by the people who made Fallout New Vegas. It's Fallout New Vegas, but somewhere else. And what the speedrun turned into was almost a pre-Fallout 3 Fallout run, where all of a sudden it's all about just movement between places, understanding dialogue, understanding the quest chains. And that made me like really, really interested in that. And I hope that the Outer Worlds 2 carries that same energy. Sure. But I mean, believe me, if you come up and talk to me about the Outer Worlds, I'll be like, okay, cool. We're going to go and I'm going to teach you this run right now.
There you go. My favorite odd category is that I've ran myself is probably Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, all levels, new game. Because almost every run is done in New Game Plus, where you've already unlocked everything for the character and you have the strongest weapons and everything. This is literally just playing every level in the story mode of the game from a fresh file, and it is a casual playthrough but fast, which is actually a compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it would be the Forgotten City ending one soldier. So it's a game with a lot of endings.
Yeah.
And turns out the ending one, the fastest way to do it is to start with a character that starts with a gun and then immediately just blow up the game. Like you just shoot the right person and it's like, oh, okay, game's over now.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's so silly and it's so much fun to just like see how quickly I can run to this one person and get in the game.
Yeah. It's almost like Far Cry 4 any
I was
percent.
gonna say, I was literally going to say Far Cry, where you just sit there and wait for the
Yeah,
credits.
I mean, it's an ending. The credits roll.
Yep.
Or I
Very
think
stuff.
about the Stanley Parable, where you just stay in the office right at the beginning of the game, and the door closes, and the narrator's like,
Or-
Stanley stayed in his office.
Yeah, or
the
like
end.
Outer Worlds, where it's
Yeah.
Outer Worlds. That's the correct one. Where it's like dumb character flies ship into the sun. Like
look, he tried his best, okay?
Yeah, it's
It
just
was going to be
how
tough.
can you end the game the most catastrophic way possible, and those are fun.
Alrighty, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We really appreciate everybody being here.
Thank you.